Yes, I just did. Thank
They're
you.
trying to know if he can vote here or not. That's what they're trying to decide. Judge Sean has some talking. So what did you find out?
I'm just going to sit here.
Okay.
I'm not going to vote.
Okay, so let's call the meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee Wednesday, January 26, 2011. Call this to order. And the next business is approval of the December 16, 2010 committee minutes. Do I hear
Move for approval.
Second.
any comments?
I guess it's you and me.
All in favor
We'll
say
alter that, yeah.
all in favor say aye.
Aye. Can I vote twice?
No.
Okay. Number 3 is consider establishing a procedure for evaluating and responding to vendor protests for the procurements that are not involving new construction, because I assume that's already under control. Okay. Let me have Brian here.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Brian Wilcox, Purchasing Manager. I don't have often occasion to come visit you, so I'd like to introduce myself.
We haven't forgotten you.
Nice to be with you again. I suggested that we put on tonight's agenda discussion of this subject. This is a subject that I put in the category of an umbrella and a baseball game. Someone once told me, take an umbrella to a baseball game and it won't rain. And the analogy may be weak, but I'm thinking if we have a process in place for handling a vendor protest, we may never get one. Then again, we may. So you never know.
We're ready.
We're ready. We've had a very good experience, and I don't want to imply that there's a problem. We think we have a good process in place for avoiding vendor protests because we think we have a process that's fair and transparent and responsive to the vendor community. But one thing we have noticed in the downturn in the economy is that vendors are a little hungrier. That can be good for the city, but it can also mean that they may be a little more aggressive in wanting our business. And we think it's prudent for the city to be a little forward-thinking on this subject, and best practice would indicate that it would be a good idea to put a process in place. You pointed out, Madam Chairman, the difference between the procurements that pertain to new construction and those that don't. Really, all I'm trying to bring to you are the procurements that are handled at the department level or are facilitated by the purchasing office. I'm not meaning to propose a process for the procurements that are handled routinely by the engineering department. Yes. They have processes and procedures that are well established, and I think it would be counterproductive to try to impose some new process or procedure for that realm of the purchasing function. I want to distribute for you a updated version of what was in your packet. Could you offer this to anybody else in the room?
It's still just one page.
Just one page, yeah. I'll take the extras. Be sure to get those distributed. My hand.
While they're doing this, I had some questions. I know we're comparing this. Got one more. That there already exists a policy within engineering. And how are things like the deadlines of the number of days? How do those things? Are they similar or different from the policy that engineering uses?
That's a good question, and I'd be glad to find out for you.
I just think we need to be consistent unless there's a reason that we're not. Now, agree that we're dealing with different people in a different format, but if there are deadlines and things like that, I think we need to be able to justify if it's different.
My impression is that the process that's in place for engineering-related purchasing is completely different, and it's a process that's been established through American Institute of Architects and other nationally recognized entities. I'm really not thinking that this is a comparable process. It's instead of, or it's just meaning to exclude that as part of the procedure that we're proposing this evening.
For instance, the deadline for 3 days, 3 calendar days, that's one of the differences. It just say business days. Is
the other
that
thing,
more or less than...
Well, but the other thing, I mean, and everybody can speak more to this than I do, but in the case of something construction that the engineering would be overseeing, that is something that occurs over a long period of time generally, and this is just like a sale. I mean, I'm simplifying it greatly, I know, but this is either something that, a sale to the city or something like that where it's just a matter of it either happens or it doesn't, where that other is a long, drawn out, and probably that's the reason that you have much more extensive rules and regulations that handle that, and that the time frames would be different.
I was just wondering, how do we notify the non-winners of bids?
Now that...
And
Well,
how does that fall into this deadline?
What we do is when we have a formal bid process, we'll say at the bid opening that that a copy of the tabulation of bids may be requested on the Friday before the board meeting at which it is first presented. So if it's at a work session, it would be the Friday before the work session. And we ask them to wait until then because that's approximately when you get that information as well. And they're provided a copy of the tabulation which marks on the tabulation the recommended winner of the bid process.
Okay, so necessarily would you have these protests before it went to BOMA?
Yeah, that's a significant difference between what I handed out in the packet and what came out this evening. This evening's handout is a little bit more fully contemplated with the advantage of a little more time. And one of the significant differences is that we are thinking that we need for these protests to be filed before you take up the award. We don't want you to be having to take up an award and then have a protest filed later that makes you wish you hadn't acted the way you acted.
You have more information when
So
you make your
that
decision.
would be required then of them.
Exactly.
In other words, if we're saying it will require that of you before the bid's awarded,
Exactly.
and if the bid is awarded, then too bad, so sad kind of thing, that you've lost your opportunity to...
The window of opportunity has closed.
And it really makes the appeal about the process that leads to the decision by the board. It's about the process we've gone through, the interpretation we made of the pricing and the submission by that vendor, and the board then is in a situation where you know that when you're making your decision. You know what we've gone through in terms of the appeal that comes through, and that appeal is more related to how well our process worked, if it was fair, how appropriate the staff recommendation and interpretation of the information was. That's kind of how I'd look at what's going on through this process.
So where, okay, so the bids go out, and, I mean, the request for bids go out, and then the bids come in, and then where's that process? Because there's got to be a window of time that you're going to let the other bidders know that they didn't receive the bid. You have to, number one, you're going to talk to the people that won the bid. Then you're going to have to notify the companies that did not, and so then that's their window of opportunity before you bring it to us.
Correct.
That's what we're saying.
That's exactly right.
So how does that play in for, what I'm looking at is, in my own mind, I'm thinking, well, what's the time period for that? And is there enough time period? Is there a window of opportunity there before it comes to us? And how much?
We generally try to give ourselves a week or so to go through the analysis of the bids. But regardless of that, once we've finalized our recommendation and we've released the agenda packet to you through the city administrator's office, that's when I would share the results with anybody who asks. The burden is on them to ask us. We don't take responsibility for notifying everybody under the sun. If they want to know the results, we're glad to share it with them, but they have to ask for them. And what we're proposing to you in this process is that once that release date has taken place and the agenda is posted on the website and so forth, then the window the clock starts ticking.
But if company A, B, and C respond to the bid, and company A wins the bid, do we notify B and C?
If they ask.
If they ask, and if they don't, we don't. That's their responsibility to get back with us.
And by the way, it does say in the instructions to the bidders
it does.
that they have to ask, and that they're welcome to ask, but that they have to ask if they want to have the results.
So the maximum time on resolving this would be 6 days?
Well,
looks like 3.
We have an appeal process that we're proposing to you. So just generally, what we're suggesting is that if a vendor wishes to submit a protest, they address it to the purchasing manager. The purchasing manager considers what is the concern and considers whether some change in the staff recommendation should be made at that time. If the vendor doesn't care for the purchasing manager's decision, then the vendor may ask for that to be considered by what we're calling an appeal panel. And it'll still be at the staff level. It would consist of the 2 assistant city administrators plus the department director for the department that requisitioned the item, the product or service. So 3 staff members at a department director level, and they would consider the matter. I did not suggest a maximum response time for the appeal panel because they may want to interview people, they may want to bring people in, but it's enough. We would have put the brakes on this coming to the board agenda, or we would have announced the night of the board meeting, we'd like to postpone this item because we've received within the last few days a protest, and we'd like to consider that.
Now, would these vendors, would they have a form to fill out with your office?
On the front page of tonight's handout, there is a kind of a checklist of what their protest should include. It's not so much a form. It's here's the information you need to provide us. Okay. And it includes a statement of reason for the vendor protest, and it also includes a statement of proposed remedy and an explanation of why the proposed remedy should be accepted by the city.
That's excellent.
And this gives them an opportunity to protest a recommendation by the staff, but it also gives an opportunity to have that heard before the board or mayor and alderman sees it. And if the protest is, turned down, then it would still go before us. But if not, then the board would be notified at the meeting that there's continuing business to attend to.
Exactly.
Is that just in a nutshell?
We would come back to you when we've got the matter resolved.
And this is just our procedure for putting that into place.
And it fills the void.
Yeah.
Fills the void. Okay.
And I know it's
I think this is a good idea, Ron. I just, number one, I didn't want to paint yourself into a corner on deadlines if this was truly a 6-day turnaround, but the way you've explained it, it's just those first two steps.
That's right.
And then it goes to the
Yeah.
appeal.
That's right.
The window of
Okay.
opportunity is better. I think that's a good idea.
Okay, is there any other comment about this then? Now, would this be recommending this to the board, or do we just need to pass this ourselves?
I believe this would, we're suggesting that this be considered by the full board
Okay.
and possibly by resolution of the board. And so a cover resolution would be layered on top of this policy.
All right. Well, I'll recommend that we send this to the board for approval.
I second that.
Cool, good.
Any other comments? All in favor, say aye.
It's getting a little
Opposed, no.
lonely over here, isn't it?
Would it be, thank you very much, would it be acceptable for us to move number 10, the audit report up, to hear that next? With no objection, can we start with that then?
Before they get snowed out.
Anybody else here that's here for a short little
Thank you
time?
very much.
No, I think
Like,
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I actually left when I left Tennessee, it was low 40s and sunny. And I hitched that to my bumper and it just fell off like a Tennessee River.
Well, I'm
It's
mad
all
you
right.
didn't bring the sun with you.
That's right.
But it should be coming your way. I appreciate your gracious offer to let me out of appearing.
But we were really worried about you bringing the snow with you.
Dragging
That
along.
came anyway.
Yes.
But I had to be in Nashville today anyway, and that
Oh,
engagement
so you
was
were
not
here.
going to be quite as understanding if the weather didn't permit me to come, so I came on anyway. I'll be brief. It sounds like if I was number 10, you got a long agenda, so I'll try not to delay that. You've got the audit there in front of you, I guess, and I hopefully you all had plenty of time to review that. I'll just make a couple of comments and answer any questions that you have. On page 1, that's our opinion. Once
I can
again,
ask one question. Are these the same, or is this,
That's the updated one.
so there are changes?
The gray one is the,
This is the one I had read through, but anyway, so
Yeah,
I
I
brought
don't
it.
have.
Okay.
doesn't have a pretty cover on it, but
That's
it's
right.
Yeah.
pretty much the same information with one
Right.
or two changes. On page 1, that is our opinion on your financial statements. It is an unqualified opinion, which means they are a fair representation of the financial condition and results of operations of the various funds of the town. And to skip over to page 13, we'll cover sort of the meat of the financial statements. I won't go into all of the details. This is the 13 and 14 is the, 12 and 13, go to page 12, is the balance sheet or statement of net assets, as it's called in governmental talk of the town. This includes all activities, all funds of the town, your governmental activities as well as business type activities, which is your utility operation, and also the fixed assets and long-term debt of the town. The net assets section on page 13, under the governmental activities, let me explain a little bit about, that's the net worth of the town. Let me explain a little bit about what is in that column. The governmental activities would include all of your general fixed assets, the equipment, fire trucks, police cars, street equipment, and the big dollars in that is your infrastructure, roads and streets and bridges, sidewalks and so forth. The net assets of the town and the governmental activities are $424 million. That does not mean you got obviously $424 million run out and spend. I'm sure you wish you did.
Yeah.
378,000 of that is or 378 million is what's invested in capital assets net of any related debt, which is still outstanding. So you take your total capital assets and subtract unpaid debt to arrive at that number. And what is left then is generally, liquid assets that you would have available to expend for the operations of the town, which the unrestricted portion of that is $44.8 million. And that, if you're trying to reconcile that to the actual fund balance in your funds, About $27 million of that is in the general fund. $12.5 million is in your capital projects, the multi-purpose capital projects fund, and then the rest of it is spread out among your other funds.
Say that again, 27 million is in the general,
Yeah, the general,
and then what?
$12.5 million would be in the capital projects fund, and these are round numbers. And then the remainder of it would be spread out through your other funds. So the majority of it is in those two funds, obviously. And if you'll flip to the next page, I always explain this one because this is the most oddball-looking financial statement that exists. If you're used to looking at commercial financial statements in your business, you've probably never seen anything like this. This is the income statement. It doesn't look like an income statement, but that's pretty much what it is. And when you think about the way that the Accounting Standards Board had this constructed, it makes a whole lot of sense for governmental activities. The first column is the cost of operating in those various areas that are listed out in the first column on the left. Second column where it says expenses. And that does include your depreciation expense. The assets, your fixed assets are tracked separately by the areas of operations that they affect, and you do record depreciation expense on this financial statement for those areas. And then the next three columns, charges for services, operating grants, and capital grants, are revenue sources that are directly connected to those expenditures or expenses. So then the fifth column of numbers there, that is the net cost of that activity that's paid for out of general governmental revenues, which it gives you a lot of information. Now, not surprising, most governmental activities don't pay for themselves. There are a few that do, but most of the time they don't. But this does give you a breakdown of what is underwritten by the general tax revenues of the town. And then the general sources of revenue are listed down underneath. That's a little more informative than the normal governmental financial statement that just lists all the revenues at the top minus all the expenditures. It does let you know exactly how much you're spending of the general revenues on each activity that you have. One other comment I'll make on that, the prior period adjustment down at the bottom. Back in 2004, when you all were required to record your infrastructure in your financial statements, you all made a very good attempt at it, but like a lot of towns, it was a huge job, and you made the best attempt you could, and ever since then you kind of been going like this, zeroing in on the correct number, and that is an adjustment that represents some infrastructure that got recorded on your books that really didn't belong to the city.
That's interesting.
In this area, there seems to be an awful lot of private streets. And I think back when you all recorded your infrastructure, exactly who owned some of those streets was a little bit fuzzy. And I believe that's in the intervening years that's been better defined. And hopefully, as you move forward, because I think you've had an adjustment on that every year. That adjustment, even though it's quite large, when you compare that to your infrastructure, it's almost immaterial. So hopefully that's going to get down to being a very small number. Okay, one other comment, and then we'll go on to the findings. If you'll look over on page 15, I want to call attention to one number here. Down under liabilities, due to other funds, if you'll look on out to the other governmental funds column, you'll notice $4.1 million. That's what all the funds that make up your smaller funds owe to other funds. And that's normal. That's a normal part of operations. One fund will pay a bill for another fund, and it takes, sometimes a few weeks or a few months to get that settled up. The facilities tax fund does have an obligation, though, of over $3 million. And you've been whittling that down, and Russ tells me that y'all expect maybe within the next year to get that paid off. And the only reason I want to bring your attention to that is there's a very obscure state law that, quite honestly, governments and government's auditors and the state of Tennessee has been ignoring for about the last 15 years. It was passed in '94. And, we were kind of not paying attention to it. The state wasn't paying attention to it. Nobody was paying attention to it. But what it says, and it's a 2-line section in the TCA, is that loans between funds that are not current have to be handled as if you had issued debt. So you got to jump through all of the same hoops that you would have to jump through if you're issuing outside debt to get a long-term loan between two funds approved. And the comptroller's office, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but they have decided they're going to start paying attention to that now, and they told us that we need to start paying attention to it and telling our clients to pay attention to it. So I bring that to your attention because, we're just advising our clients of it this year. Next year, we'll probably have to start issuing formal findings on that. And I would say when the June 30, 2011 audits are issued, the comptroller's office is more than likely going to start taking some action on those. They're wanting to know for towns that have non-current interfund loans, what they're going to do about them.
Well, when you say
Which we do.
Yeah.
We're one of the cities that has that.
Well, there's a lot of people that have those.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's been kind of ignored for a long time.
Well, actually, if you remember, a year ago, we did discuss that
Yeah.
because it was a concern, mainly because it was so large,
Yeah.
but not expecting that other people would be.
Well,
concerned
you
about
all,
it.
I'm not as concerned about it because you all have a plan. It's just a matter of time till the plan works out and that gets repaid. We've got clients that have a large number that have no plan. I mean, they don't know how they're going to repay it. So
back up. When you're saying non-current funds,
Okay.
are you talking?
Police building.
No, the facilities tax
You
is.
sort of lost me in there.
One fund owes another fund a certain amount, and they do not have the resources to repay it within 12 months.
That they borrowed it from another fund? Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought you
Well,
were.
actually,
And-
But I
another
wasn't
fund,
sure if
another
you said
fund just paid for
non-current.
it, really,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's on the books.
Right,
as
you've
being
got
owed.
two, and this one borrowed from this one.
One fund will reimburse the other fund.
Right,
over
and
time.
that
There's
hasn't
several
been done,
ways
is what
you
he's
could-
talking about.
There's several ways you could
All right.
get to that point and record the transaction, but the reality of it is that there's one fund owes another fund
Yeah.
some money.
Right.
Uh,
And so you're saying, after 1994, that's really illegal if we don't refund it by the year end? or
No,
That's how you count.
what the law
How
says,
you account
Good
for it.
point, of how
Okay.
you account for
yeah,
it.
what the
Okay.
law says.
How it
when
goes
you-
on the books.
When you read it, it's one of these things that, I don't know if y'all have ever read TCA, but it'll talk about one thing and it'll make reference to another section, and you go to that section and it takes you to another section. You got to read about 5 sections before you can get the full meaning of
That's your
all
job.
this. But the end result is that if y'all want to make a long-term loan between funds, you have to go through the same process you would go through to issue debt to someone outside the city. And it can only be for things that are allowable under Tennessee code, which is pretty much capital assets. And that's what's going to cause some problems. It's not a problem for you all, but I've got clients that this will cause a problem for because they're making interfund loans to subsidize operations and not to build a new city hall or a new
Right.
Police
Police
headquarters.
headquarters.
For example.
Exactly.
They're doing it because one fund's operations can't support itself. Now, to my knowledge, you all do not have that.
No, I don't think
I
we
do.
that
I
issue.
would not think so.
I would not think we would. And
So-
so the other thing, so what basically this is coming down to is just the way we're going to counter report it on our.
Well, we'll have to
books.
make some, if we don't pay it off by the end of this next fiscal year, then we would have to make some.
We'll go through this process.
Go through
Yeah.
a process
Have to read. So we're talking about $3 million? About? Did you-
It's at June 30, it was just over $3 million. It's probably lower now.
Okay.
But also, that's not just the facilities tax, it also is the road impact fee,
Yes.
road impact fund, excuse me. That also is in the red, if you want to say that, or I have to say, you say it a better way, but.
I'm not sure what the state's going to do for the municipalities that are in violation of this. I think if you have a plan, I hope they'll be reasonable and work with you. I think the ones that they're probably concerned about are the ones that have no plan.
And if you have noticed, we did not have anything that we are using the facilities tax for except repayment of this debt this year. So that in itself indicates that is our plan, or that we have
I
a plan.
think by the time you go through the audit process next year, if it's not paid off, it probably will be close to being paid off. So if you get criticized for it, you can just say, we took care of that.
That may be an optimistic thought, but we certainly would expect it to be much lower.
Much lower.
Much lower,
Okay.
yes. Yes, no, that would be pretty ambitious, I think, to pay that off in 1 year. But anyway, so we will need to be looking at that in terms of facilities tax fund and the road impact fund there. But thank you for bringing that to our attention. And as I say, surprisingly, we had talked about that last year, mainly just because the number was so big.
And I might add that if you notice the last couple of months, we've added to your reports that come out with this packet on construction activity, specifically to let you know about building permits, facilities tax, and road impact fees, so that you can month by month keep up with where we are.
Yeah, that's good.
And also, these two funds are definitely capital improvements. So it's certainly not operational. That we're not using any money at all for operations.
We're warning all our clients on this because over the, a lot of governments, especially smaller ones, have gotten kind of lax about that, and they just view these interfund accounts as something that exists because they have to, and they never make any attempt to settle them up. And there needs to be, at the end of every fiscal year, some sort of settlement made when possible. And some of these represent balances that get settled every month. It's just as a normal bookkeeping process. With that, we will skip all these intervening pages, which are full of wonderful information that will put you to sleep if you have insomnia, and go back to our findings. The two letters in front of that, one's our comments on starting on page 105. One is our report on your internal control and compliance, and we do have a few findings that are generated off of that report. And the other, on page 107, that is our report on compliance with your federal grants, and we have no findings related to that.
And that is,
Which is good.
not on federal grants, but some of the grants are always a little bit of a problem to show the administration on that. But I don't think we have a real problem with it.
It usually has, there's not a finding this year, but the last 2 or 3 years we've had some minor findings because of the recording and of the timing of revenues and not being able to get that synchronized. But I would point out we've had an awful lot of grants in the last 2 to 3 years that we normally don't have. Beginning with the CDBG that we became eligible for about 4 years ago. So that's kind of triggered that, but we're getting closer to having that under control.
Yeah, there is a finding on the recording of the grant revenues, but which I'll cover here in just a minute. But as far as your compliance with all the plethora of federal regulations that you got and hoops you got to jump through, there was no findings on those. We'll flip over to page 110. We've got 5 findings here I'll run through very quickly. The first one has got to do with recording of accounts payable. This kind of comes and goes. I think we've had this a time or two in the past. After accounts payable getting at June 30, you got to have a cutoff and try to get all the bills that belong in the previous fiscal year in that year and get the ones that belong in the next fiscal year in that year. And sometimes that is tough to do and doesn't get done as well as it should. And also there's issues related to this in regard to how you budget for those expenditures, and that's always a problem for a lot of our clients. Sometimes through no fault of their own, they will budget for an expenditure in 1 year, and then the vendor providing the service or doesn't do something they're supposed to do, and they deliver the service in early July, and all of a sudden you got something that you budgeted for in one year, but you got to rebudget for it in the next year simply because it didn't get done on time. And there's a way around that, and it's not a recommendation; it's just a suggestion for your consideration, and that's what's called encumbrance accounting. And it only affects your budget. It doesn't affect your other financial statements, only your budgetary statements. And in essence, what you do is you record the budgetary expenditure when you issue the purchase order or sign the contract. Now, this doesn't work quite as easy for real long-term contracts. It might take a couple of years to work out, but short-term stuff where you issue a purchase order for something in May and it gets delivered to you in July, and normally it would be recorded as an expenditure in July. If you use encumbrance accounting, you can go on and record an expenditure against your budget when you issue the purchase order. So, and that may be something that you might want to consider, because I think that might help out in this area. Because I think one of the things that your staff struggles with is because of the timing of when vendors deliver, they get an invoice for something that was delivered the first 2 weeks of July. It was ordered in the previous year. It was budgeted in the previous year, but accounting principles dictate that you record the expenditure when you get the service, which is in July. So that's just something for y'all to consider. I mean, we don't have an opinion about whether you should do it or shouldn't do it. It does complicate your accounting process a little bit. So that's I'm sitting here hoping that Russ and Mike aren't shooting darts at me. It does complicate the accounting, but outside of that, it does help you manage your budget a little bit better. The second item there, failure to record grant receivables, and as Russ mentioned, this has been an issue from time to time, is getting those receivables recorded correctly. It's better now. It's much better now than it used to be. I think a couple of years ago, we had a finding that it was a very sizable amount related to the billing of grant revenues, and you've made great strides in that area. It's just at this June 30th, it wasn't, again, the cutoff wasn't quite as clean as it should have been. Okay, the third item there. That was probably an oversight or a misunderstanding, but unfortunately it was a material amount, so we were obligated to comment on it. When the street department was recording their inventory at the end of the year, they counted as inventory some equipment that really should have been capitalized. So, but that's why you have an accounting staff to review that stuff, and that's why you have auditors to review it after the accounting staff reviews it, so that things like that get caught. We've never seen that in the past, so I really think that was just a one-time accidental happening. It may be something you might want to check on in the future to be sure that doesn't happen again. Fourth item there, this is also accounts receivable improperly recorded. This is also, I think, maybe a one-time occurrence, but it was a sizable occurrence. During the last year, the state of Tennessee changed the business tax collection process, and they now collect business taxes on your behalf. Well, hopefully it's on your behalf. And then as they collect them, they remit them back to the local governments, the portion that they're supposed to get. This is the state's plan for improving compliance with the business tax law. It's brand new. The jury's still out on whether it's being effective or not, but the legislature, when they changed this, at least thought that they could do a better job of collecting business tax and paying it back to the local governments than the local governments were doing statewide. I think in your case that probably wasn't true. I think y'all were doing a very good job of collecting that. But anyway, specifically on this, the process that you all go through in recording your receivable for business tax was ending up double counting what was coming back from the state. So there was a pretty good adjustment at the end of the year. We attributed that to the change in the process. And I don't anticipate anything like that going forward. I think that your staff understand it now. The fifth item there, failure to record cash properly across the funds. We noticed when we looked at the balance sheet of the individual funds, they were out of balance. And this was simply the process and when you have a joint bank account that pays a lot of the bills the way you all do, it's not easy it is easy for funds to get out of balance, where you need to transfer some money from one fund to another to reimburse it for bills that is paid. But the funds are supposed to balance independently of each other. And again, it's something we've never seen before, and I think it was, again, just an aberration that probably will not repeat itself. Because we sat down and talked with Mike and Russ about that, and I don't think it's going to happen again. We had one comment to make on what didn't get elevated to the level of the finding. We've commented on this in the past, and y'all have improved on it. Checks to employees where you're reimbursing them for travel. Mostly it's travel, but sometimes you do reimburse employees for other things. It's very hard to get all the receipts. And what I'm saying to you, I can say to probably 99% of other clients, because everybody struggles with this. We did notice a few instances where the documentation was a little bit lacking. Either they put down an amount to be reimbursed for mileage, but they didn't put down where they drove to or how many miles they drove. There might have been a few missing credit card receipts. It was nothing that caused us any alarm. It's just something that you got to stay on, because it's hard to get all that stuff in. And I'm proud to say I don't think we found any where you guys didn't turn in receipts. That's always tough to sit across the table from the elected officials.
And they're the guilty ones.
And they're the guilty ones about turning in their credit card receipts and their travel reimbursements.
Because we don't go anywhere.
We don't have any credit.
Anyway, that's all the comments I've got. I'd be happy
Stay in
to take
town.
any questions you might have. And if you think of something later on, I'll be happy to run back up here, or Russ has got my number. You can call me and we can talk about it. But you all do a very good job. You've got a very good staff. And,
We do.
You've got we sit down and compare all of our clients, and you all rank up in the top. You've got a lot of debt, but you have a good plan for managing the debt. So I'm not too worried when I look at your balance sheet and see all that debt out there. I think you got a good plan for it.
Well, I'm pleased that you were able to be here tonight after we were not expecting that. And so
We're going to wave at you on Skype.
That's about right. That's about right. Are there other comments or anything else that we need to bring up, or any comments that we need to make in response?
I really don't think so. The only thing that I would add is, as we mentioned at the December meeting, was if you have any questions about the numbers themselves, they're really not outside auditor issues.
That's
They're
right.
really issues that you could direct at staff. Why did we spend so much on fuel in this department? Why is this number so much larger than the year before? I would urge you, when you get a chance, to go through and look at this. And also, as this comprehensive report gives you some great historical background on where we've been and where we're going. The last section that we call the statistical section has a world of information that is very helpful. And for the audience that's at home, this is online already. It's out there for the world to see. And if any of our citizens want to look at those 10-year histories of how the revenues and expenditures have changed, I would urge them to do so.
I will tell you, if you look at that, because when you look at the revenues and expenditures over a 10-year period, it kind of goes up and down. And when you're looking at traditional business financial statements over a 10-year period, usually you see a trend. Governments are not like that. They do go up and down. Usually, if you dig into it and look for the reasons why it's up and down, it's usually capital projects. In one given year, you may borrow a bunch of money to do a big project, but all that's lumped in together, so that will cause the numbers to trend up and down.
Well, ours is trending up, basically,
Yeah.
in that case. But you are, I'm sure, correct on that. And we have been doing that too. But the statistical, sections are very interesting if you are looking at trends in many respects.
Madam Chairman, I might actually have one thing. On page 113 is actually the city's corrective action plan about how
yes,
we're actually
Okay.
correcting
That's what I was
Right,
wondering.
right.
in the current year.
Yeah, I should mention that. If we had any
Page
issue
back
with
on
y'all's
it.
plan to fix things, we would point that out to you, but I think y'all have handled these.
Not many, that's good.
Is there anything that we
Excellent.
need to do to wrap this up then, or?
No, just thanks
accept
Ryan
the
for making the
report.
trip.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Appreciate you
Appreciate
moving me
this.
up.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And,
Wow.
and as I think I said, whenever I was looking at this, really the questions that I had were more just on the numbers that really were not involved in the audit, but just to get some further information about us. But the one thing that I think last year that I was concerned about was those the fund balances there, and that turned out to be something that everybody's going to need to be concerned about. Whether
I guess I should add the fact that we talk to contacts inside the comptroller's office all the time, and picking up on this particular item is kind of a byproduct to a bigger issue that they have that they're concerned about, and that is where a lot of the rural governments are borrowing money inappropriately. And that's what has really triggered the whole push behind this law to begin with. Clearly, a negative fund balance in a fund where it's borrowed from another fund is an issue, but it's not nearly as bad as when a county executive goes to the bank and borrows money without getting approval from his commission or from the comptroller themselves. So this is a small part of a much larger issue that the comptroller's office is looking to address in a very big way over the next couple of years. And they have asked some of us that are on the Tennessee GFOA board to use our newsletter and every means possible to try to spread the word that they're basically coming after those people who have done that we need to dot the I's and cross the T's, and this is really a small part of a bigger issue.
What kind of results can the state comptroller have on extreme situations?
They can stop you from borrowing.
Really?
They can not approve borrowing.
well, I can tell you that whenever the sewer fund was inadequate in a community around here, they made them stop issuing sewer permits.
Building, connections.
And it was the financial part of it that was the problem. It wasn't the it wasn't the
Capacity
working.
of the system.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And they really have a much bigger stick than that they don't talk about a lot, but they could invalidate the interest. If you inappropriately go to a bank and borrow money or to bondholders and borrow money, and the comptroller rules it inappropriate, the state gets the interest, not the bondholders and not the bank.
Ouch.
And they can go
That
through the
does
court
what they're
system.
supposed to
to get
credit
that. So
rating.
they have a very big financial stick, and they're letting us know they plan to use it if we can't get everybody back on track.
Well, and if you think about these years, the last few years when even Franklin has had to make some cutbacks, then other places that are not as well off as we are in terms of revenues and things like that, they must be having difficult times.
They are, and some of it's just lack of knowledge. I mean, sometimes some people just think they can go to the bank. I was elected mayor. I could go to the bank and borrow money. So,
Right.
and I'm
That's a
told
random example. That's not.
I'm told
There's all the checks out. Please,
Never go to the bank.
Let Linda do that.
Electronically deposit.
You're next on the check.
Okay, well,
See deposits, see never withdrawals.
that sounds good to me.
Linda does the.
We better watch out. Some people
Yeah.
got into trouble last night.
That's
Such comments. Well, are we,
Digging out from that one.
are we ready to move to our item 4 on the agenda, and that is the discussion for the nonprofit and other governmental appropriations?
As you remember, last year, or through this last budget process, we talked about altering that process a little bit, and had in the past relied on the United Way to do a review and a recommendation to the board. And we're trying to follow back up with this committee and get your guidance on how you want to proceed, assuming that we're not going to use the United Way's services again this year, and that we want to basically bring that into the board process and talk to you about how we do that. We provided you examples of the information that United Way collected and the information that the county collects, and I think Russ can chime in on some thoughts on where we might want to end up on that spectrum. And then also, I guess I would just ask you too, is where do we think we want to be in terms of process? How much of a submission do you want, or wide variety of requests you want from these organizations or even other organizations, or if you want to narrow the focus, especially since we're sort of transitioning here, to say, you know, what we've gone through the last couple years is basically been, we're going to treat everybody the same. And if everybody's taking a reduction, they're going to take the same reduction. If you want to take that same approach, do we want to put everybody through an exercise where they request X when we know we're not going to get anywhere close to that? So I guess you don't have to necessarily answer that tonight, but be thinking about, realistically, do we want to focus on a target in terms of where that funding is realistically going to be at the outset, as opposed to folks going through and making sort of a wide open request, and then we bring it back down to something that's closer to what our financial reality is, et cetera. And we may want to issue some guidelines related to that, both in terms of what's feasible financially for these folks to expect, as well as there are implications too in terms of the process. If we're picking this up as an administrative oversight and process, et cetera, there may be some benefits to kind of holding the line, keeping it as it is now, as we're getting our process and systems up to date to be able to provide the additional oversight that we're going to need to provide internally that we used to rely on the United Way to provide for us. So Russ has given this a lot of thought, and I'd like to give him a chance to give you some pointers going into this, and then we want your feedback on where you want to go and what questions you want us to ask going forward.
To do this right, there really is somewhat of an ordeal in terms of the process. I mean, to really do this properly, we need to do a lot of data collection from these people, and some of the forms address that. You can see that the United Way form is very lengthy. They've got a lot of pages, a lot of things to fill out. The county forms are really about 3 pages. They're very simple. They're much more direct. I imagine that there's probably a happy medium somewhere where we can get a little bit farther along in gleaning the detail of how they're going to spend our taxpayers' money. And Eric and I have talked about trying to use something that he did in Hamilton County, and that is come up with a contract for them to sign that very specifically says, if we're asking for money for this, and we're agreeing that we will produce evidence that this is how we spent your money. We didn't take it and do something else with it. We're going to do it here. And I think that's where I would feel comfortable with when the auditors come in, to have something that very clearly delineates that. We do have a lot of documentation now, but it's not really in that condensed form.
And one of the other things you may have in the contract too is there may be certain performance elements you want to see. You want to hear about a certain number of people served, or certain elements of a program may be important to you to see. You may not want to hit everything that organization does, but you may want to focus your investment on certain aspects of what an organization does, or you can do it both on the expense side and on the programmatic side as well, and you can do a blend of both. So it gives you sort of a place to establish the public purpose for the funding, and then some basic accountabilities, both in terms of what happens operationally and what you can look to for some reporting on outcomes as well.
So how often do you get this reporting? Is it quarterly or biannual?
It would depend on the organization, but a lot of them were quarterly or a couple times a year, that sort of thing, depending on the organization. You didn't want to overburden folks on reporting, but you wanted to have some check-ins along the way so that you could potentially identify if there were any issues. So that's what we did with a number of these sorts of organizations in Hamilton County, and something I've been wanting us to get to. We just haven't had a chance to quite get there yet.
This is kind of the moment of transition, where the United Way collected all this information, including proof that these nonprofits are 501c3s, they have their status in place, their audit reports, and so on. These are requirements from the comptroller that we have this type of information. We're going to have to gear up to do that again. So, in a way, I hate to complicate that process this year with the idea of bringing all of these people in and doing 30-minute to hour presentations from each and every one of them.
But also, to be realistic, we're not going to have that much more money, if any.
And that's really the second part. It's bad enough to devote your time and their time to doing this, because they have better things to do as well. If realistically we're not going to have any more money to do that with, we've been speculating internally whether we should just let them know there's not going to be a process this year. We're going to go through the beginning of putting together whatever the process will be for the future in the contracts. But this year, we're just going to hold it to what we had last year, or you're going to get 2% more or 5% less. The wish of the board over the last couple of years has been to treat everybody equally. If that is still the same sentiment, maybe that's where we should begin instead of where we end up, if you think that makes some sense. But this is going to be very time-consuming, and it does affect the next item on your agenda, which is the calendar.
Schedule.
We've scheduled an extra night to do essentially, we've put revenue and all those other things in there with appropriations, but realistically, that's going to be appropriations night. It's going to eat up most of the evening if we do these, because all of the people, especially if it's open-ended where they can ask for additional monies this year, they're going to want to come in and make a presentation on everything that they do. And it's unfortunate that this is just not a year where we're going to have a lot more in the way of revenues to do a lot with. We will have some additional revenues, we believe, but we've already committed to a payroll increase in January that is not fully, we only had half a year in this budget, so we're going to have to make an accommodation for that. We will have additional debt service.
Yes.
We've postponed a lot of things, a lot of purchases, a lot of projects, smaller projects that we do through operations that we're just going to have to get around to this year. So, I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, but there's just not going to be a lot of revenue, a lot of things that we could increase beyond the basic essentials.
The basic outlook that we've talked to our leadership team about is that we may not be making the kind of reductions we've had to make the last 2 years, but it's not going to be climbing at any great rate. We're probably going to be largely holding our own in this budget.
Flat budget.
Yeah, again, we won't make the reductions, but there's not going to be huge, dramatic increases or changes. We're still kind of getting out of a hole. And the good news is that we're on the way out, but we're still not out yet. And so that's the mindset that we've talked to everybody about, and the same will apply with the outside organizations that we provide funding to as well.
And there are always more worthy places to put the money than there is money. I mean, it's the same thing with us with our capital improvements. There are more worthy projects than there is money. But what is the feeling about?
Well, I have an article I want to share with you. But go ahead.
Before I say anything, I probably need to go on record as saying that I am on the board of the J.L. Clay Center, but there is no monetary reimbursement or advantage for either me or my family. So.
Diane, I have a question.
Sure. You want to come up so you can be heard over?
Well, I guess the next thing I need to say is that I feel I can make a fair and impartial judgment on these issues.
I just have a question. What is the benefit to United Way in our going through them? I know what the benefit to us is.
We're not going through them. That's the issue.
But I didn't know what you mean before.
What would the benefit be?
To them?
Yes.
Really, I think the benefit was the opportunity to extend some of the effort they do in their funding and the kind of the community priority setting that they do and applying it to the funding that the city provided and providing a recommendation to the board. Now, the last 2 years, we haven't accepted that recommendation. We've done something different. But, we didn't pay them any money. We didn't,
No.
they just tapped their volunteer panel for an extra effort to do a review on our behalf and give us a recommendation.
But why?
Because we asked them to.
Well, they're very
it's a
good
service.
at it. In other
And
words,
they have a lot of experience.
They sort of have an existing
Does it-
infrastructure,
does
and they
it-
were willing to loan it to us,
All right,
essentially.
does it help them?
not that I know of. I mean,
It's a service that they provide.
Only for the feeling that you've helped the community.
well, their mission is to help these agencies.
Right.
So if they can, if they're giving money to the J.L. Clay Center and they can, through their review, obtain more money for the J.L. Clay Center through us, then they've advanced their mission.
Well, that's what I want. That's the answer to my question. Thank you.
We talked about
find what I
the
want.
comptroller requiring certain information.
Yes.
So if we settled on the information from Williamson County, does that meet the requirements?
Okay, good.
The actual handout that they have is fairly minimal, and there are other things required that are in the forms. In other words, we have to get the financial statements. We have to verify that they're 501c3s because you can only give money to 501c3s. So there are things other than what's in the forms. It's more to do with what information that you ask about the programs. I think that you as a board don't want to give money to programs if you don't know how they're going to spend it. If you're giving money to something and people are using it to take trips instead of feed the
Or
hungry
training or
provide help for domestic abuse victims or things like that, that's probably not the ideal situation. We need to know, and that's what I think this says, if you're going to give people money, you need to know what they're spending it on. Now, how you go about doing that, whether you use the county form, city form.
Yeah.
So this first form that's for United Way. Right? That's what they use?
All but the last 3 pages.
Or United Way.
Okay, and that's Williamson County.
Yeah, if you tear off the back
I
2
got it.
pages, you've got the county forms. And the United Way, including their covered letter, would send out 12
20
pages. something
pages,
like that.
yeah.
And they would ask for a lot of copies.
That's right.
What we had hoped to do is to reduce paperwork. That if agencies are already filling this out for the United Way, it ought to be a piece of cake for them to simply Xerox a copy and hand it to us, making whatever changes there are as far as the use of the money. But we heard feedback from several of the agencies that they felt like this was cumbersome, and that was part of the complaint.
Okay. I've got a question here. And then
Go ahead. No, let him go ahead first, because I'm going to not be popular.
Setting a listing and
Mike has made his divulging that he's on the board. I'm also the director of the Clay Center too. You got what you got in the packet as far as all the information there. That's really not it. I mean, you've got the audit, you've got the state charitable solicitation letter, you've got the 990 that you have to turn in. You've got there's a multitude of paperwork, plus a multitude of copies, and that's what I've been saying for the last several years when we sit and listen to this right here. And I've said the same thing that Russ just got through saying. From the committee standpoint, basically you set the guidelines at the beginning, and the 501c3s know what those guidelines are. We submit if it's no increase. There's absolutely no reason for a 501c3 to sit here for 30 minutes and tell you what they do on no increase. On no increase. You go through, you do your budget. I have not been to the county. I have not been to the county but one time in 5 years. The county commission, the county budget commission says it'll be a 2% increase, it'll be a no increase, it'll be a 10% reduction, and you fill out your paperwork for that and you turn it into the county and it's done. You don't. I went to the committee one time, first started out, and I was asking for more from the county because we had been cut by like $17,000 by the city or something other like that. So I asked for the county to make up some of that. Was not successful with that, but it's not as difficult a process as what's been betrayed over the last several years. It will be some work. Somebody's got to look to make sure that I've turned it. Use me as an example to make sure that I've turned in a 501c3, that I've turned in an audit, that I've turned in a 990, that I've turned in a state charitable solicitation letter, and that I fill out whatever paperwork is required. But it should not be 15, 16, 17, 25 copies of the paperwork that Russ would need for that. And streamline it, set the parameters at a meeting such as this right here. Let the ones that are on the organization, on the list, know what those parameters are, and they fill out the paperwork for that. If it's no increase, you put it on there, it's no increase. My major complaint has been that even though we set over the last couple of years decreases, those numbers were jockeyed around within the United Way organization. I don't think that should have occurred. Still don't, and won't support that. But I think we're heading in the right direction. I don't think it's necessary that we do as much paperwork as we think we have to do. That's some of it, but that's sure not all of it. And I'd like to see us pull it back in-house, look at it, see what happens on it, and at some point in time, you may want to have the organizations come before you and tell you what they do. But if there's no increase, or if there's a decrease, there is no reason to have them come before you and take their 30 minutes, their 45 minutes, and take up your time when you know that there's not going to be an increase or a decrease there. I suspect there's not going to be one. I don't think anybody's out there lobbying. Well, I mean, we're all lobbying for something, but I don't think anybody's out there lobbying for one. But it's a extremely cumbersome process that we go through in order to receive the taxpayers' money indirectly through another organization.
Thank you for your comments.
I think if I could just extend that a little bit, I think what the agencies are looking for this year is not essentially more money, but it's clarity and certainty. I mean, the phone's ringing off the wall. What do we need to do? How are we going to do this? What's the city process going to be? You know, please let us know, because they're trying to formulate their own budgets so that they can submit requests to other places. If we continue with this, we really owe it to them to let them kind of know where they are, what the process is going to be, the timing, the paperwork, and realistically what the amounts they can expect.
Here it comes.
Here it goes.
Since 2005, every year I say the same thing. And I'm going to say it, and I don't care if you agree with me or not. I'm still going to say it because from conservative principles, looking at our government, all you need to do is go and look at the federal government, and you look at the state governments, and you go down to the city governments, and you find out every single time, if you do a study, the government is intruded into lives, into areas that government has no jurisdiction, is so far out outside the Constitution and the realms of what government is to do for the people. However we got ourselves in these messes is a huge subject and can't really be discussed at this board meeting. And that's not the intent. The intent is for me to continuously say, I think it's outside the jurisdiction of the government to take taxpayers' money and to pick and choose which nonprofits we're going to give the taxpayers' money to. I think it's wrong. I don't think it's governmental jurisdiction to do that. And I'm going to vote against it this year totally if we don't do something to rectify the situation. Now, I totally disagree that we pull the rug out from under these people, that it would not be fair, that it would not be the right thing to do. There are organizations, and I used to be on the board, I stepped down from Bridges, but there are organizations out there, and it has nothing to do because I was on that board, but there are some that reciprocate to the city that are reciprocal organizations that do provide services to the city that we would have to pay for. When there's a domestic violence situation, our policemen cannot go out there, pick up the mother, the children, the father, the children, and take them to a shelter or someplace. Well, I mean, they cannot house them here at our police station. So the reciprocation there is for someone from Bridges to be there to take the mother and children or father and children to a shelter and provide the transportation and provide the shelter and food. Now, we shouldn't be paying for the counseling. We shouldn't be paying for all that other stuff that they do provide. But for the reciprocation of them picking up and taking care of them is a need that we don't have. Is a need that we have, but we don't have the facilities to do. So that's a reciprocation. There are probably another one or maybe two other organizations that would be reciprocal. Now, what I say has nothing to do with whether these organizations are worthy. I think they're all worthy. I think these are organizations that are doing a great service to our community. I don't know where we would be without them. And we have to have them. But we have got to get a better approach to this. The people, the community are the ones, the people in our churches and our other organizations need to be supporting these organizations. The government should not be taking the taxpayers' money and making these decisions of where to put this money. So my proposal would be is to gradually every year reduce till we phase the program out. And that would be over numbers of years. Now, especially in this economy, where we are right now with this economy, it's tough. It's going to be really tough to take and give money out again this year. But I totally do not do not agree with pulling the rug out from under the organizations at all. And I think we have to go gently, and I think we have to do it year after year after year. And that's my proposal, is that we reduce it by, pick a number, 5%, if that's comfortable. If people can't live with the 10%, do 5%. Just reduce it across the board, 5%, and that's it. I don't want to see more paperwork. I don't want to see more paperwork and hours and effort on the nonprofit side, nor do I want to see it on the city side, because that means we're spending more money with our staff and our time and our effort, and we do not need to be spending our staff's time and our money to do more work on these types of things. And with you, Clyde, I think it needs to be a streamline, it needs cut and dry, get over and done with. And I really think that I'd ask my fellow board members to support a 5% reduction. If they wouldn't take 10, which might be a little hefty this year, I don't know, but at least a 5% reduction across the board, the nonprofits that we have. We have not tinkered with this list in years, and people don't get on and off this list, and this list has sort of been there for a while. And again, I do talk to my constituents about it. I talk to people all over town about it, and I don't really have people that disagree with that. In fact, many people brought it to me, and I have to agree. I totally agree with them. But many people brought it to me, and people across town, when I talk to them, they don't really disagree. This is not government's jurisdiction, but they always have this soft spot in their heart that says, well, we need to give to the nonprofits. But so many of them, over and over, tell me over and over each time that they don't believe that it's our responsibility to take the taxpayers' money and make those decisions for them.
Do you want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we send it to the board when it comes, the appropriate time comes, that we would reduce across the board 5% reduction this year for all the nonprofits that we're giving to.
Oh, go on. You made a motion for that.
No, I mean, I don't know if we need that or not, but I don't know if that's appropriate here.
I will not second the motion.
And I will just, I really, if we do not address this issue, and we do not start reducing this and phasing this program out eventually, I really can't vote and support the part of the budget that gives to nonprofits. I just can't do it.
So maybe at the board you might want to make the motion, and if we're not going to make that recommendation.
One of the decisions we need to make is, is United Way going to do it?
That's right. So the other part is then, what's the process?
Bring it in-house.
And I think we had some discussion earlier in the year about that. If you're not going to use United Way's recommendation, I don't think it's fair to them and their volunteers to continue to make them put the hours and hours of work into doing it when we kind of say thank you, but we're doing our own thing. And so unless you're going to use their recommendation, I think we've kind of crossed that bridge, and we're going to do our own thing for the time being.
Well, if you kept it the same, or if you reduced it, or if you even kept it the same, do we even need them? Do we even need in-house even?
Do we need some? We need some compliance.
You've got to have basic accountability.
We have to have some, right.
You can't just say, here's the money.
But absolutely, but we could bring that in-house and we could streamline that.
Well, anything you're giving to us it may be streamlined compared to what the organizations did with the United Way, but it's new to us.
Right.
It's not something we did before as a staff.
Wait, not that we've done in the last, 4 years or 5 years?
4 or 5 years.
It was done before.
Yeah, and it depends what you're going to ask them. Are you going to ask them for accountability of every dime that we give them and what they're spending it on? Or have we done that in the past through United Way? I mean, they're not listing every single item where this money goes.
We're going to show you a budget.
Yeah, well, they always show us a budget.
A budget and an audit, and then
we can stipulate what they spend the money.
And the compliance that's required.
Yeah.
We'll be able to collect all the forms and so on. I mean, the application form is the only thing that will really need to be developed. Before we let the United Way do it, we collected all the required information, but we really didn't have a proper application form, but that's something that we can do. And what I'm hearing is that you're expecting staff to do that. Whatever that form is going to look like, we need to go ahead and get that out to the agencies so they can start working on it. So, we need to know, are we going to do it? And that's the indication that I hear. And the second thing is, what do we tell them about the process?
And the time frame.
Are they going to come in and make a presentation, or are they going to be limited to what they had last year?
No.
If they are going to be limited to last year or less, then let's save them the time of going through all of that.
I honestly don't want to go back to 2005, 2006, when we had to sit here and listen to every organization's come in. They don't want to do that. We don't want to hear it. We don't.
Well, we don't have extra money right now, too.
It's a nightmare
which
to go
makes
through
it
that for them and us, because I think it wastes time. And then unless you're planning to revamp the entire program, then maybe you'd want to do that. But I don't want to get into that.
Well, could we incorporate maybe them not presenting on the front end, but at this mid-year review, that they could come in and say, here's what we've spent your money on?
I don't know if it's a mid-year review, but I would think the time to interview them is not during budget time.
Right.
I think the time to interview them is during the summer when they're running the programs.
You got it.
And verify to yourselves that this is someone we want to support. But when it comes to budget time, they need to have some guidance as to what they can request.
I think the one thing I would ask that we ask them to provide, along with the basic information, is some description of what our funding goes towards. And if it's everything in my budget, well, then we've got to look at everything in that budget and say, do we feel everything in that budget fulfills a public purpose? If it's to pay the utilities at a facility that serves the community, that might be something we feel is a better connection and where we want to use our money. I think that's a good question to ask people, so that you can say at the end of the day, okay, here's what we're paying for. And then we recognize that that fills the public purpose.
If we're going
to give you 10,000,
but leave it open enough to them to tell you what that is, as opposed to us maybe dictating it. But if you're not comfortable with what you hear back, then we can have a discussion about it and we focus in on what that is.
If we're going to give you $10,000, tell us where you're going to put that money. Where is that going to be directed?
What's it go for?
What part of your budget is that directed towards?
And that would be part of the paperwork that we
I'd suggest that's part of the submission. Tell us up front where our money, what it really does for you. Where does that go? What is that?
Where it's going to be used.
Yeah. And if it's the general budget, okay, well then tell us what that means. But I'd sort of focus in on it up front would be helpful.
If you do the general budget, you're going to come in on the audit in the 990, and you're going to see it. And you're going to see what somebody's water bill is. You're going to see what somebody's electric bill is. You're going to see what somebody's office supply is.
Okay, so can we come to some kind of consensus? Yes, go ahead.
I've got one more comment.
Thank you.
And that is, we go through this process, and I think Deb made a good point, is
and I do
what are the functions of these organizations? What is it going to cost us if we stop funding them? Mm-hmm. Or which organizations really do deserve city funding where it's saving us money, saving us a service that we'd have to create. So something that would outline that for us as we go forward.
So that could be one of the possible.
That could be part of that response.
I think we need
description, program description or something like that.
So what is
whose office will handle this? Will it be finance?
Yeah,
well, because the auditors will come looking for the information. I think, someone made the comment that Russ and Mike would have to do that. I would address you to Mike.
And Mike would maybe address you to somebody else.
Okay, now let's see if we can put this together then. So
please use it that way.
What's the consensus on, or maybe, Russ, you could kind of
Well, here's what I would recommend, having heard all of your comments. The county form is very simple. It's descriptive. It does ask for what are you going to use the money for. I think we could accompany that with a request in the letter form that says specifically we'd like to know what it is that you do that the city would otherwise have to do.
Very good question.
We could go ahead and add that, because I don't think that's in either of the United Way or the county form.
Never answered that question.
So we could add that. I think we need to go ahead and let them know that we'll have budget hearings on such and such a date, but it's unlikely that they'll be given time to appear, and that
this funding expectation.
Is.
Can we agree that we'll tell them that there will be no increases?
Yes. Please.
Should we? Was that?
And this needs to go to the full board, because we need to have this
Okay, but the consensus is, at this point, use something similar to the county form,
Yes.
plus get all the required documentation, and that we request these ideas saying, what do you plan to do with the money, and also what functions do you have that assist the city and keep them from having to do some things.
I think
And then is the consensus, then we would say no increase for next year, and that,
or maybe a decrease.
just say,
No increase for sure.
no. I think, would this be our recommendations?
But I think in the form too, it needs to be what you said. I think it needs to be not, it shouldn't be broad, like what do you plan to do with the money? I think it should be very specific, like where will these funds be, where are you going to plan to designate these funds to in your budget specifically? Tell us.
Okay.
Is it the general fund? Is it utilities? Is it whatever? Let them tell us, because I think we need to ask them to be specific on that.
And they need to know that on the front end.
So you use for the funds that they will get from the city?
Right.
What's the disqualifier? What if they are using it for the utilities, or what if they are?
I think utilities would be fine.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
But you could say something that you might not be comfortable with from a public purpose.
But giving somebody a chance
it'd
to
be
go
good
to
to
a
see
conference or something like that.
Conferences.
One of the employees go to a conference. I mean, I'm just using that as an
Florida in
example.
January.
And
There you go.
And a lot of them don't do those things, but even if they do, I mean, we might use it for training purposes or retreats or whatever. Do we want to fund that? I mean, do we want to go
Well, maybe we see what we get back, and then
Exactly.
this is a transition year.
This gives you a chance to
It's a
respond to that and say,
transition year.
okay.
If we give them a deadline of April the 1st or the 25th of March or something like that, we'll have enough time to process this information, get it out to you as the board members for review before we get to the point where we have any hearings. The hearings will take up the calendar next, are going to be the third week of May, so we'll have plenty of time to review that and see if there's anyone that you would want to disqualify.
Okay, so at this point, do we have a motion to?
I'll
Do
make
like-
a motion.
Margaret.
Yes, and
Yeah,
is there a second to the motion?
What's the motion?
The motion
What
to,
Ann just-
no, to say that we would go to Russ, use something similar to the county
Yeah.
form.
Okay,
What
we'll
do
use- okay.
you, ask a question about what use
We'll
for
create
the,
an application form.
Yeah, what you just said.
We'll
Second.
set a deadline for that to be submitted,
Okay.
and we'll let them know that it is unlikely there will be any additional funding.
how about that? Is
I'll
that-
second.
Second that. Okay, now, let's get some comment.
I'd like to go back to what Bev said. I understand where you're coming from, but I also understand that there is a part of Franklin that is very special. For years, we have taken care of our own through this. We spend money on beautification, we spend money on economic development, we spend money on all of these things. But our citizens and our children and our seniors are just as important to us as a new store on the corner, if not more. And I would hate to see us get to the place where we cut out all of that and take the heart out of this town. Because when we take care of our folks through these nonprofits, and Lord knows the churches are doing everything they can do. Individuals, how many things do you get in the mail every day asking for money? Begging for money. Here we sit with this wonderful town, this beautiful city, and I think we owe it to our citizens to take care of that part of our city. So I would never, ever vote for doing away or even cutting any more than we absolutely have to from our taxes. Our taxpayers pay for the special things that we get in the city. And if taking care of our citizens is important, then I think we need to do this.
Margaret?
Yes.
I don't argue with anything you said. It's all well and good, and that is true. But it's a difference between jurisdiction of governments, and this is where we've gotten off the track years ago, and that's why our federal government is in such disarray.
I'm not talking about the federal
No,
government.
but that's where it dribbles down from. It comes down, and then we are at a city level, and we are spending and doing things. We're doing it today through other programs as well and other things, that it's not in the makeup of government. And the churches have lost their jurisdictions. They used to take care of all these different areas, along with the citizens of the cities and the states and the government or the country. But I'm not going to get into it. But I understand what you're saying. I totally understand what you're saying. But that is a total different argument than what I'm saying.
No, I know.
But let me
I
tell
hear
you, we
you.
can
I know,
get
but it's
this.
totally different.
You know, we can make the
We're on the same
recommendation,
wavelength.
and then if there are some motions that need to be made at the board level, whether decrease, increase,
But
or
I
whatever you
felt
want to
like I
say.
needed to say this on the front end because I want everybody to know exactly how I feel about it. And I will not change my mind about taking the heart out of this town.
It's feelings.
Is there any other comment then? Okay, so are we ready to vote on the recommendation to the board?
Not about feelings.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, no? Okay.
Not about
Now we
feelings.
get to
Got to keep the
the
feelings out of it.
budget meetings calendar.
And we referenced this as we were talking through the last item. Item 5 is a draft calendar that we've got laid out for our budget process. We'd like to come to you over the next 3+ months, next 3 meetings that we have, and bring the various departments to you, give them a brief opportunity to give you an overview of their budget and their requests, and have discussion with them. This describes the process we'll go through in terms of preparing that and getting that to you. But this sort of lays out a similar process that we've used over the last couple years, and would result in a recommended budget, my recommended budget, coming out to you May 6th, the first Friday in May, and then give you the better part of the rest of May and June to go through and finish adoption and hold budget hearings as a committee in May, and then forward it on to the board at the end of May and into June for final approval. So this is what we're working on. Of course, we're always flexible enough to add things that you'd like us to add or adjust as we go. I would like to at least pretty well lock in when the departments happen, because that helps us plan for the administrative work we need to do ahead of time with them. Mike's working very extensively with departments and rolling out a program we got last year that helps us do multi-year forecasting, and you'll see some of that. And so that helps him get those departments on board and ready to go as this information comes out to you. So I think the most important things is that we are comfortable with how these department presentations lay out, so that we can plan for that and work through this with you over the next several months.
And we have stated that in the last year or two, we've gotten a lot of presentations about what the departments are doing, and so I hope we have that background now, and we can look at the work going forward, or something. I just say that, in other words, we want to hear from them, but not.
We'll try to hold our departmental presentations is somewhere around 10 minutes. Does that sound pretty good?
I guess we should highlight anything that
Make
would
sure you bring
reflect an
dinner.
increase within their department or any
That's
major
right.
changes.
Yes, or major
More
changes.
from budgetary changes,
Yes,
that kind of
yes.
things, or
That's what we need.
more in the nature of change than of overview.
Change or increase.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we
And
get that.
as you
That's
say, budgetary considerations there.
And
because I
decreases would be good.
think- Okay, and
Yeah. Dream on, Mike.
and the other thing is, what about this first one on February the 17th? We were saying that that was supposed to be police.
We're
and
going to
that's
need
the-
to look at that date.
So you might switch them around then?
Well, actually, what I was going to suggest, that 17th date is actually the date that has been set for Chief Moore's retirement.
Oh, yeah.
And
right.
there's
I'm looking
a
at
sort of
the
a
calendar.
community event happening. The police department is hosting that afternoon from 3 to 6. I think a lot of us will want to participate in that. So I would suggest we look at an alternative in terms of our meeting. I leave that open to you in terms of what can work for you, whether it's a similar Wednesday or a Monday or something like that we could try to fit it in. But that date
What about that? What is
presents
that
a
Monday?
challenge for us.
That Monday is, but see,
Valentine's
that's...
Day is the
Oh,
14th.
I forgot that.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to happen, or?
Hey,
Oh, but wait, what about the 15th?
the
which is
county,
Tuesday.
the county called a meeting.
I don't know why we couldn't do that.
What about
There
the
may be a
15th?
in the county
stormwater
commission
appeal
joint meeting
that
on
I'm
Valentine's
on
Day.
Okay.
that night.
On the, which one?
On the 15th.
15th?
That's at 5, though, usually.
Well,
Actually, I could wait and do later. I mean, I'm having a hard
I
time
hate
getting
for
here at
people to
5.
start,
What date's that?
On the 15th?
15th, Tuesday.
I got another calendar here, too.
16th?
The 16th
Is it Wednesday?
is Wednesday.
Yep.
Not the best time for me. If it's going to be, a later meeting. Well,
15th
for
would
several
work.
reasons. What about the 15th?
I'm good.
Perfect.
That's the third
Wait a minute.
Third Tuesday.
Third
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Third Tuesday.
Yeah, the only thing is the chamber thing, but that's later.
and Mike, that's an uncertainty whether is it
I
appeals?
think there wasn't an appeals, but there was something we had to do with one of the stormwater.
It's stormwater appeal board, but unless they have an appeal, they usually cancel.
Okay.
So
I was trying to remember the last thing David sent me, that we canceled the last one, but he said that we need to take some action on it.
So what's the time for
It's
it?
at 5. Can we wait a day? and let
Yeah,
them
we can
talk?
check on that.
Okay,
We can check
okay.
with David and
add
see.
that as a possible?
And
That's a possible.
see if it could be, if it's not a
Yeah.
lengthy meeting, maybe
It's
we
not a lengthy meeting.
can work with the start time.
They would have a forum without me. I would come here rather than there.
But
Well, let's see
not
what we
that,
can-
just even.
Tentatively, let's put it on
What are
the
we doing?
15th,
15th.
and I'll check with David tomorrow. And if push comes to shove, I'll be
And
here.
we can maybe adjust time frame on that too.
Okay.
Okay. And
15th
then-
of February.
And then the rest of them would be just in our regular meeting time.
Yeah, we should,
Okay.
as far as we can tell.
Okay, so then we really don't need to have any,
I don't think you need any action. We just wanted to lay this out for you and go from there.
Did we decide that's okay?
That's okay. I think that's okay.
okay, then
The
the
next
next
week is the
item
problem.
is the review of revenue and expense projection for the hotel tax fund.
Yes, I wanted to add that to the agenda to just do a little bit of review and get you up to date on where the hotel tax is. It's really had a storied life over its last 10 or 11 years. It started out with borrowed money where the city and the county put in half of it. I did give you kind of a handout tonight that has a little bit of history on there. And as when you go home and you look at that, it kind of layers in what has happened over time. It started out where we had hoped that the hotel tax would cover the debt service and an estimated loss of roughly $300,000 a year ad infinitum. There's a letter in there from the former city administrator that says that in year 20, they expected almost a $400,000 deficit in that operating account. And if you go back and look at some of the
Look at what
numbers, I
happened.
think we've only had about 3 years where we actually ended up the year in a deficit position. But originally, the funds were there to do the conference center. Sometime in the last 5 years, we passed an additional 2% tax in order to fund the debt service for Harlansdale and for the Eastern Flank Battlefield property. We then started layering in some debt service for some of the improvements that we had on those sites. And then a couple of years later, we started contributing an amount roughly equal to 1% of the total hotel tax to the Convention and Visitors Bureau. So the ante has gone up over the years, and on this large page that we handed out tonight, because we didn't think you could read the small version that we put in the packet.
Some of the numbers are different. right?
Some of the numbers are a little different, too. We did catch a mistake.
Okay.
But we were hoping you wouldn't catch it. But it gives you, excuse me, starting with '09, it goes through actual '09 and '10, the budget for '11, the estimated actual through '11, and that's based on, we have fully 12 months of receipts from that. So we have essentially estimated that. The number you will notice, at least on the hotel tax, is up quite a bit. That's because we were extremely conservative with the number that we budgeted in light of the economy. But the new hotels that have come on have not cannibalized the older hotels to the extent that we feared.
That too.
So we're looking at having a pretty good year. That's the good side. If you go down to the bottom side, you'll notice that the transfer, about 2/3 of the way down the page, the transfer to debt service it has been growing. In the very first column, the '09, we paid the debt service directly. But after we created the debt service account, it's listed a couple of lines below there as a transfer.
It was up above it before.
One of the things that we wanted to do is to kind of forecast the revenues, not including the impact of the Drury Hotel that's being built. This is just a very simple 3% growth rate, assuming 2% for inflation and 1% real growth in the utilization because of the companies and the growth in the population here, to look at what the revenues would look like if you go out to 2015 and 2016, and how the additional debt service that we have put in there, because of the streetscape on Columbia Avenue and because of the estimate of the streetscape on Hillsborough, we have basically loaded up the debt service in a worst-case scenario. So you can see if we fully fund the streetscape elements of those two big projects from the hotel tax, we still end up with a fairly positive fund balance at the end. Now, it's dwindling down from the large amounts that we've had in the past. The other element that I would throw in, and Alderman Berger, you brought it up earlier when we were looking at the audit, about we actually had an operating deficit in the operations of the conference center last year. That was really from the fall of '09, when they just completely fell off the map until they had canceled conferences and things like that. Their estimate internally, and you see that in the later report that we give you on the conference center, is holding fairly true to form, that they feel like they will generate an operating profit this year, which should contribute some money. If you'll notice in the out years, we always budget that at zero. We don't assume a loss or a gain, but the last 4 or 5 years, the gains have been considerable, anywhere from $200,000 to as much as $600,000 from the conference center. Now, we share that halvesies with the county. But what that means is that there's probably some revenue that we are excluding here. And by the way, when you go down below operations and it says Cool Springs Conference Center, the negative numbers, that's a negative expense. That means it's good. It's only when it's positive that it's bad. So
you're talking about the 317?
Right. The 317 was the '09 contribution that we received from our investment in the conference center. The $48,000 is a loss in the year just ended, in the audit report you just received, and the estimated actual for this year is in the 200 range. I have no doubt if the economy comes back, albeit slowly, that those numbers will hold up in those out years, but we've always taken the position that we won't budget them for that. The reason I wanted to talk about this tonight just a little bit and get it on your radar screen is there are a lot of, you're getting ready to look at projects through the CIP, and there are some projects, particularly related to the battlefield, related to Harlansdale, that we have talked about in the past using these funds to do that. And I know there was going to be some questions and some perhaps doubts in your mind as to what this particular fund could stand in the way of additional debt service above and beyond. We do think that we have completely accounted for the debt service, again, for those road, the streetscape elements that are in the Columbia Avenue and the Hillsborough Road. So that's already in here.
And I would say we've been extremely conservative. I think that Hillsborough number is probably a bit on the high side in terms of what we can attribute to
Is that the little
that.
part of Hillsborough or the whole thing?
We've tried to ascribe the various more streetscape elements to that for the whole project and tried to pull those out and look at that. It was about 20-some% on the Columbia project. I think we've even rounded up on that on this one, and I'm not sure it's quite the same ratio in this project just because we lessened some of those elements as we move further out towards McHatcher.
And we won't know exactly what those are.
It's rough now, but it's on the high side, I would say, most likely.
But again, does this include the Hillsborough out to?
McHatcher.
The whole project.
This up,
It is the whole project.
but we haven't approved the funding for the second part.
You have the whole project in your funding plan.
In the plan.
You haven't sold the debt for everything yet.
Okay.
That's the
That's
distinction.
my point.
But you did, the funding plan has the whole project in it.
And we have sold the debt for roughly half of it.
Yeah.
Because that's the era. Or the
Yeah, because of the Build America bonds.
Build America.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Forgot about those.
my goal through this was to get you comfortable with these numbers, to look at them, take them home. If you have some questions about them, about growth rates, about what the conference center outlook is, what we have done is we've tried to give a small increase to the revenue. We've also incorporated a small increase in the amount that we pay to the CVB, so we've tried to incorporate that. If there's anything else that you would like for us to do to stress test these numbers, we'd be happy to do that.
The CVB increase should track with the revenue increase, because what we've done is essentially allocated 1% of the tax to their operations. So as the revenue grows, that contribution grows. If it declines, it declines with revenue.
How with the CVB, where are we, how many years out are we committed to that? Did we lock ourselves
We've
into that?
done it as
or
an
is that-
ongoing
That's
commitment.
open-ended?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's how we've assumed it.
That's
here.
just
Yeah,
has
I-
been assumed.
Mhm.
I wasn't sure if we had put a limit on that or not. Okay, good.
Okay, one of the things I'd like to, we've always talked about 2014. That would be the payout on the convention center. And that funding from that then would be available for these park projects that we just kind of put on hold.
And you actually
Well-
see that, Mike, if you look at 2013, the debt service is $2.2 million, and it drops off by a little over $600,000.
But I hate in the meantime that we begin to siphon little bits away to other projects. If the plan has been that these two projects were the most appropriate, I guess, for hotel motel tax.
Well, see, I don't think that has ever been a policy. I think it was just the custom there for a while. Then when some other things came up, they also, as you say, got a piece of it. So that is
So
maybe
I
a
would
discussion
be
for another time. But
in favor of minimizing the use of those funds for other things after 2014. I guess that's what I think parks and those entities have been very patient, and I would hate for that to it not to be understood that once 2014 gets here, then we can expect and it won't be our decision, but
no.
One of the things that you don't see with this, that will be a companion that will be part of the discussion with probably the Capital Investment Committee and then the full board as we look at CIP projects, is the thought of sort of building a financial plan within this fund that focuses on the needs that we are identifying at Harlansdale, at Eastern Flank, other park projects, and that's one of the things that Lisa is working on is to identify that so we can kind of look at systematically what we need to do. We've got an investment at Harlansdale, and we've got structures that we need to look at long-term, what we need to do to keep them viable and address various needs, and that's what we're going to try to start building from this, and sort of like we built financial plans in other areas, start to build a one out of this one as well that sort of ties into that so that you can get a sense of how does this meet the needs that we're identifying with our various park projects and our priorities within that.
And we also ought to say that even though for the last 2 or 3 years since we had the police headquarters take up all the facilities tax money, the parks had a huge portion of that before the police headquarters. I mean, if you look at, at the background on that, parks got a very large portion of that before, and it's just that's dried up too, because the police headquarters got to be paid off, and as we heard tonight, that's and it's going to be looked at closer from that. But this does give overview of things. Do we need to do anything on this?
It's informational at this point.
Informational, and be prepared to consider this as we get into the CIP.
It'll start to be what we talk about in supporting that. So.
Parks director's been very patient.
Let me say, I understand that there's not a lot of tape left. We're going to do another.
There's not much more to talk about.
That's right. Okay, so on the goals for the fiscal year 11 and 12.
What I'd suggest is these were the goals we set last year in the budget process, and maybe we pencil in our calendar that we talked about a little bit ago in February, a return to these goals, and you can give us input about what you'd like to see us put in. There may be things that aren't as relevant as they were a year or two ago that we need to maybe pull out so that we're focused on the right thing. So this is really to just start that discussion, and we'll be glad to revisit it.
We can carry that over until the next meeting.
Yeah, and I would suggest this committee recommends a set of goals to the full board, and that becomes something that helps shape what we do on the staff side in terms of recommending the budget.
Okay. Well, and then, let's see, I just covered up my agenda here. Oh, then the other would be the monthly reports, which are informational only. And I think...
And we've set our meeting.
I was going to say, number 9, we've already set the meeting, and number 10 was the audit, which we've already looked at.
Did you have any comments on that? Number 7?
Yeah, I think that we're saying that we're going to put this back on the agenda for February. Because, and let us look to see, I think in general, they're worthy, but I did have some suggestions, like one of the things, we're saying that we're going to follow our policy on fund balance, but I think we also need to consider saying that we want to follow our policy on debt, too. And so we need to talk about that. But we'll just put that back on for February. Okay.
And the sales tax reports there.
And the reports are here.
Yeah, the reports are here.
Anything else, Sam?
I'll need to say that it's nice to deliver some good reports.
That is good.
Yeah, Russ gets it.
For money?
I'm darn tired of that.
That's right. Okay, well, then I guess there's a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
That was good.
Comes out.